Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Webinar Wednesday with the First Nations Public Service Secretariat. My name is Selena Dorme, and I'm from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation here in North Vancouver. But I also want to recognize our neighboring nations also on this unceded territory, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation people as well. Today is March 97th. Just kidding. I have no idea what day it is. Kind of losing my mind as all the walls close in on me, but welcome back to another webinar. Today's webinar, we are talking HR. So this 45-minute session will include short presentations outlining human resources issues arising from COVID-19 to date and how to proceed with managing HR right now as we're dealing with this uncertain time. We have two wonderful speakers with us today. We have Roy Spinks, the HR manager from Lytton First Nation, and we have employment lawyer Scott McCann who is a partner at Harris & Company law firm. So thank you both for joining us. I also want to recognize Bronwyn Geddes. She's part of the FNPSS team, and she'll be working in the background answering any questions that you may have in the chat. But again, I encourage you to submit any questions that you want answered live using that Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. And we're going to go ahead and get started with Roy, who's going to lead us off, and then Scott, and then we'll open it up for questions. So thanks so much for joining, and this is going to be a great session.
Thank you, Selena. My name is Roy Spinks. I'm resource manager for Lytton First Nation. I am Nlakabmuk from the Lytton First Nation band. I've grown up in around Lytton. Did go to college at a very young time, back in 1982. So I chose the wrong path. I ended up failing, dropping out, and ended up taking on any job I could. A railroader, logger, truck driver. I worked on fisheries, highways. So I've asked the band, every time I got into a hard places, I've asked the band, you know, what can I do? I'll do anything. So I've been the relief receptionist, relief bookkeeper, executive assistant. I've worked restorative justice, taken just about any job, relief janitor even, you know, I mean, I went about 7 years without a T4. I was an active entrepreneur. Decided that at fairly midlife, I guess, decided to go back to school. Went to TRU, going from my Bachelor of Business Administration with a major in marketing and a minor in human resource management. Shortly after graduating, the administrator of the day offered me, well, actually developed an HR position and offered it to me, asked me to apply, and applied, and then she actually hired me with some formal education, no managerial experience other than my entrepreneurship team that I like to lead. Right now, I've been the HR manager for about 3.5 years now, and in that short time, we've really come along. We've qualified for the AFOA. Part of my job is to do a succession plan. Right now, so actually after March 23rd, we activated our EOC. Kind of everybody had to go home and work from home. I self-isolate. The timing of the situation was really a really critical point, you know, with the ending of the fiscal year and the beginning of the new fiscal year presented all kinds of HR challenges. Including year-end evaluations, trying to complete them in a virtual setting. It's difficult. After we activated our EOC, our chief and council decided that we should suspend all hiring and HR activities altogether until after April 30th, when they would reassess and determine if we were going to return back to normal situation. Some of the issues that I face, like I said, are the HR hiring processes that I had going. I had to contact all candidates and let them know that it has been suspended and will reevaluate. All my we all had to started working from home, and that presented technology issues. Everybody needed to have the same platform, access to the internet, the technology, even if it was just the phone. We had to address data usage and overages on data. I mean, we actually worked with our local internet service provider, and they've actually allowed unlimited access during normal business hours, which is otherwise, I mean, like I could see data. I mean, everybody's using data right now, and it's just a huge draw. And I'm thankful to our service provider. And even just working from home presents issues about tracking, employees, whether they're doing actual work for the 7 hours that we are actually paying them for, presents reporting issues and communication. I mean, we're have our regular program managers meeting, but some people don't have video feed. So, I mean, not being able to physically see people, it's challenging. I mean, we have a tight knit group, and not being able to see each other does present mental health issues. Another one of the things that we were talking about is succession planning. Like, one of the positions that I had to put on hold was for a band administrator succession plan position. And then once we got into once I actively joined the EOC, I was presented with time restraints and information overload. Oh my God, trying to keep up with my regular HR duties and the new tasks of the EOC presented challenges. And, I know that a lot of people are volunteers on EOC, or emergency preparedness is a volunteer situation, but once you get into an EOC situation, it is, we can recover some of the costs for payroll, and but that doesn't mean that we can give up on our day job. As HR, I'm a department of one. I can't lean on anybody else other than my administrator, and he's been really flexible and giving us the opportunity to make a difference in the EOC world during this pandemic situation. When I think about essential services, in my opinion, our band office has been managing poverty forever. Every position is essential for some purpose, and then trying to say that, sorry, but you're not in essential services. We might have to let you go. But like I said, these are challenges that are still active. We can't move forward until after our chief and council reassesses the situation on April 30th. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Scott, because I enjoyed conferences that I've joined with him. I've enjoyed the questions and answers, especially. He's a wealth of information. I'd like to thank you again for taking the time to listen to me, and all.
Thank you so much, Roy. Really appreciate it. Scott McCann is going to go next. He actually has a short presentation through PowerPoint that he's going to go ahead and share his screen, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. Go ahead, Scott.
Great, thank you very much for having me. And I can just let you know, for those of you, I see a lot of names on this list of people I recognize, but for those of you that don't know me, my name is Scott McCann, and I'm a labor and employment lawyer from a law firm called Harris & Company. Our law firm does all labor and employment law, and I do labor and employment law, but the vast majority of my work is with First Nations and with First Nation organizations. And so I prepared this just really brief presentation of just kind of the top 4 issues that I've been dealing with my clients. I'm going to talk a little bit about the leaves of absences that are available, talk about working from home, talk about an exposure control plan, and finally talk a little bit about layoff. And hopefully that'll get some questions rolling. And it's just really brief, so I'll try and see if my technology skills work and I can make this happen. PowerPoint. All right, hopefully that's working for you.
Yes.
Okay. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is some of the amendments, the leave provisions that are available under the Canada Labour Code. So what the government essentially did was made a bunch of changes. Both provincial and federal government made changes to the Canada Labour Code and the Employment Standards Act to allow for COVID-related leaves. And this kind of has a two benefits or two different ways of looking at it. So one issue is your employees now have a whole range of new leaves that they can request, and under the federal legislation, it's a very broad leave. So essentially, it's drafted so that anything to do or related with COVID-19, they're entitled to a leave of up to 16 weeks. And so some employers are dealing with this as far as now they're getting very marginal requests. Other employers are seeing this as a great tool or opportunity so that they can avoid having to lay employees off. So if you have employees, there's not really a lot of work for them to do. Rather than laying them off, one of the options is to allow them to take this leave of absence. And so that maintains their connection to the workplace, and all of their seniority, pension, health, and disability benefits will continue. And so this is the types of leaves that I'm recommending for employers where they have employees that are worried about coming into work, and maybe there's not enough work for them. Rather than laying them off or having them go off on a leave, they can request one of these COVID-19 leaves and go off for 16 weeks. They can then go and get their CERB benefits from the government, and you're not having to lay them off. And so this next slide is essentially the Employment Standards Act. The Employment Standards Act, so for those of, I see there's some names on the list there of not necessarily those working directly for the nation. Those who are working for nation businesses, or are working for the schools, or are working for First Nation related societies, they're going to be covered by the Employment Standards Act. The Employment Standards Act is slightly more narrow, but essentially provides the same kind of leave. So if the person has COVID-19, they're in quarantine or self-isolation, or they're simply not directed not to work by the employer because for safety reasons, they're entitled to leave. They also, if they need to take care of their children or dependents because of school getting canceled or any COVID-related reasons, that gives them the right to the leave. Medical certificates, until September 30th, 2020, the employees don't need to substantiate compassionate care leave, critical illness leave, or medical leave with a medical certificate. Basically, the usual requirement of getting medical certificates for any kind of leaves or any kind of medical leaves are kind of out the window. The only time when we're looking at getting medical certificates now is really on a return to work after the person has had COVID. You're going to want to get some kind of confirmation that they're actually safe to return to work. So that's really the only circumstance now where we're looking at medical leaves. Can an employee choose to be on a leave of absence? So essentially, this is that first part. Yes, the employee can request the leave of absence. What a lot of my clients have been doing have been giving employees this option, going to them when they're looking at potentially laying them off, saying, you are entitled to take a leave. We're looking at potential layoffs. As you know, there's not a lot of work left for you to do. And so you're entitled to this and you can go and get that benefit rather than getting a layoff. And most employees are taking that option. The working from home is really one of the bigger issues that I'm dealing with my clients. And the number one first step for working from home is putting together a work from home policy. And a lot of my clients, because of how quickly this all came on, and as Roy mentioned, having it right at year end for most people, this has really caused a lot of issues. We've had issues where employees just decide on their own, look, I'm working from home, I'm refusing to come in. All of, a whole range of issues with working from home. So the first thing to deal with all these issues is just get a work from home policy. I've developed a template for my clients, and I'm happy to give it to anyone who's on this call. If you send me an email, I can send you the template. It's just kind of a base to work from that sets out dealing with the issues that arise from working from home. So it addresses stuff such as the employees, whether or not they're, as Roy said, whether or not they're actually working. So it's going to set out requirements for them checking in, for them reporting on what they're doing. You're going to want, one of the key things is making sure that any work from home is actually approved, that they're not just going and doing it on their own, and then setting up all of the other issues dealing with data security and exposure risks, so that if they're dealing with confidential or sensitive information, that's being safely and securely stored, and that the system that you set up for them to access your system, and this will be something you have to work with your IT department if you have one, making sure that they only have access to stuff that they need to have access to if they're logging in remotely. So these are the kinds of basic issues that come up with working from home, and I'm sure there'll be questions on that. One of the other issues is having a exposure control plan, and this is a requirement of WorkSafe. Essentially, you'll need to get that whoever your health and safety person is should have already put in an exposure control plan for dealing with COVID specifically, and so that sets out such things as making sure you're cleaning workplaces, especially if you're going to continue to operate. You have to have this in place. And so it'll talk about following social distancing recommendations, cleanliness procedures, so that you're having people cleaning surfaces, and just keeping employees safe to the highest extent possible. If you don't have this and you don't have a First Nation, or sorry, a health and safety person, then you can contact me and I can put you in touch with our WorkSafe lawyers who can kind of point you in the right direction of what you need to do. These plans are fairly detailed, and you'll want someone who has an understanding of workers' compensation issues to putting it together. So the final issue is really dealing with layoffs. Layoffs is a really tricky issue, and because of how this all came on, a lot of people just went ahead and immediately, when things slowed down or it was clear, especially in the private sector where they were being forced to shut down, they were just laying people off using the temporary layoff language, either under the Canada Labour Code or the Employment Standards Act. For unionized workplaces, there may be a few unionized workplaces. I see some people on the list who have unions. In those conditions, you want to make sure that you're following the collective agreement, and the collective agreement language is the key. For those that don't have unions, the issue that you run into is that there's no actual right under common law to lay people off temporarily. And so a temporary layoff could potentially be a constructive dismissal. And there's a few plaintiff lawyers out there that are advertising on the radio and writing articles to the paper saying, look, your employer doesn't have a right to temporarily lay you off. You could potentially make a claim of constructive dismissal. I disagree with that type of strategy for employees. It's a bad one for an employee, because what it means is the employee has to quit and sue the employer and say that they've been dismissed because of this temporary layoff. There's a lot of defenses for that for employers. But it's something that you need to be aware of. If you have a long-term employee, they're getting close to retirement and they're not real happy, that might be someone who might be a risk of doing that, making that type of claim. And so this is why I'm encouraging employers to look at the leave of absence option rather than the layoff, because a leave of absence doesn't end the employment relationship. The final issue on a layoff is really whether or not you're going to continue their benefits while they're on a layoff. We're recommending that if the employer is paying for the benefits while they're employed, they should make effort to try and continue that. And your layoff letter, you want to make sure that it has information that you're guaranteeing their return, and that minimizes your risks. There are other options other than layoff, work sharing options there are some programs out there where the government will pay under EI for work sharing. There's EI top-up options, and there's a whole range of government programs available. If you go to our website at harrisco.com, we've been posting basically daily all of the different updates and all the things are available. And as soon as you go on our website, you'll get a pop-up that says COVID-related updates. And so we have them for both federal and provincial employers, and it sets out all the different things that are available. And so we've got this chart as well, and I'll actually show you what it looks like on the website. I'll try and see if I can make this work. Hopefully you can see that. This is on our website, and what it does is this is helpful for your employees and for you as an employer. So it sets out the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, whether or not what it is, and whether or not how long it lasts, what the process is to apply, and who's eligible for it. So whether it's the employer that's eligible or the employee for each one of the different benefits. And so this is a real helpful kind of form. It sets out the temporary payroll subsidy, work sharing, the CERB, EI sickness benefits, EI regular, and then the supplementary unemployment benefits all in one spot. So you can send your employees there if they're wondering what they're eligible for, and you can go there as an employer as well and see if there's any particular programs that are eligible for you. So that's all I had for a prepared presentation. So I'm happy we can start with any questions that have come in now. I'll turn it over to Selena.
Thank you both so much. We have a number of questions already in the queue. So this has been a very busy group chat and webinar. So I'm really excited that we can jump in with questions. All right, our first question is from Andrew Tom from the Gitxsan Child and Family Services Society. Thank you for offering this webinar. My question is, which policy changes should we be making in our office procedure manuals and human resource policies, I guess, to address any changes, immediate changes due to COVID-19?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, that you don't necessarily have to change your policy manuals or anything going forward, but you want to put in some. So this work at home policy that I'm talking about, it's actually intended to be a temporary policy because you may not want this continuing after people working from home. And so we usually make it clear in there that this is a temporary policy. So a work from home policy is one that you're going to want to add if you don't already have one. And even if you already have one, you're going to want to look at it and possibly just put out an amendment to it that allows for working just specific to this COVID pandemic policy, so that then there's no issue with changing it after. You can just revoke that one particular portion of the policy. I wouldn't go in and start changing all of your leave or any of those, because they're all very special leaves and they're likely going to be taken out once the pandemic is over. And so I don't see any real reason to make any significant changes to your current policy manual. But the adding a few additional policies along the way to deal with things as they come up is probably the best way to deal with it.
Great. Thanks so much. The next question is, in the event of any temporary layoffs and recall, what are employers doing for employee benefits packages, paying an employee's share while they're off work?
Yeah, this is a very good question. And so when all of the different employers, everyone is basically doing different things. And so basically what I'm telling my clients is if you can afford to do it, you should keep the benefits going on a layoff if you can. Obviously on a leave of absence, then you have an obligation to continue at least paying your share if the employee is paying their share. Generally, you have to keep the opportunity to get the benefits going. But on a layoff, there's no obligation to maintain the employee benefits. But because we're treating this as a temporary layoff and not a not a severance of the employment relationship, and we don't want the employee to view this as a severance of the employment relationship. I prefer if the employer, if they can afford it, to continue to pay the benefits, and if there's two parts to that where the employee has a share, I'm recommending that employers pay both parts during the leave so that it's not an additional cost to an employee that's not receiving an income. That of course depends on the financial health of the employer.
Great, thank you so much. There's been several questions about your PowerPoint and whether or not it would be made available to everybody afterwards, and or the templates that you had talked about. So I just want to clarify if those PowerPoint slides can be shared with the attendees afterwards. We're happy to do that. If you want to share it with us, we can forward it on to them, or should they contact you directly?
Yeah, I'm happy to share it to you. I had an issue, just a technical issue sending it, because I guess it's a big file and it was getting rejected in the email system, but I'm happy to share it with whoever wants it. So if you want to email me directly, and I'll try and figure out a way to get it to you guys as well.
Great, thanks so much. The next question is, can you explain the EI top-up a little bit more?
Sure, the EI top-up is essentially what they call them sub-plans, and what it is that it allows employers, and traditionally it's used for maternity leaves and that type of thing, where an employer registers their plan, and what they do is, because EI only pays up to a maximum certain amount, employers agree to pay additional on top of that up to their usual income to help the employee further, particularly with higher earning employees. And so the thing with the EI subplan is that you have to get it registered before you can do it. And right now it takes about 14 days to register. What some employers are doing is just not promising to pay us a top up once it gets approved. If you pay it without it being approved, it can count as wages against the employee, and it can affect their entitlement to benefits. And so what you want to do is make sure you get that application in to EI, and then you can promise the employees that once that's approved, you'll pay them the top-up benefit.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is, from what I understand, there are a few bands that have a dedicated HR person or occupational health and safety person. Is there a resource that can assist with coordinating the administrative side of emergency management plans and policies with a community's emergency management plan?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what's available. So, that's something we can probably look into and see if we can find something with someone who's organizing that, or some kind of resource that's available for emergency management plans.
Great. One other thing I want to mention, if we don't get a chance to answer all of these questions, we will circle back to Scott, and hopefully he can answer some of those questions that didn't get answered. We can share your name and your contact information with him so he can follow up. That's okay with you, Scott? Great. The next question is, if an employee has requested a leave of absence due to COVID-19, would we then prepare an ROE so they are eligible for EI and CERB benefits?
Yes, and so anytime there's a break in earnings, it doesn't matter if they're a layoff or not, if it's just a leave of absence, once that break is longer than 3 or 5, I can't remember what the number is, 3 or 5 days, then you have to issue the ROE. So we just issue it right away. But interestingly, they don't actually need to wait for that to go and apply. They can apply right away. So that the government's relaxed the restriction that they have to wait for their ROE before they can make the application.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is the COVID-19 leave of absence available under the Canada Labour Code and the BC Employment Standards Act?
And so yes, it's not identical, and you'll see when you get the 2 slides when we get those to you. I've set it out in some detail there, but essentially the federal Canada Labour Code one is much more broad. It just says COVID related, and so that could be essentially anything. The BC one is a little bit more specific, so it limits it to, but practically speaking, it's going to cover all the same kind of things. If the employee just has to be able to point to, look, I have childcare duties, or I have I'm worried about my safety in the workplace. That's a pretty nebulous type thing, and they're going to be able to get leave. So the federal one's more broadly worded, but the provincial one has essentially the same leaves.
Great, thanks so much. The next question is, I have not found solid information on whether an employer can continue to employ on a part-time basis an employee on an unpaid leave in receipt of CERB. Are you able to speak to part-time work while collecting CERB? Such as, can employees on unpaid leave collecting CERB work hours to a maximum of $1,000 in earnings?
Yeah, and my understanding is they can make up to that one. They've set that limit of making up to $1,000 before it affects their CERB, and so I think that's the intent. But I'm not 100% certain. I can get back to that person if they're concerned about it. I can look into that a little further.
Great, thank you so much. Should there be a specific pandemic policies in the employee handbook? I definitely think that's something we're all just, now it's like, yes, that's a great idea.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'll be drafting a bunch more of those. Right now, we're just kind of in emergency dealing mode, but pandemic policy is probably a good idea just to deal with any other kind of emergency situation. And, you know, even at our law firm, we're looking at the same kind of issues. You know, I just talked about it this morning with our executive team about, you know, this kind of highlights that, you know, what are we going to do if there's an earthquake, or what are we going to do, you know, with all these different types of possibilities out there? Are we really prepared for that? And so, you know, this is actually as good a warning as any to that being prepared for emergencies and having something in your policies on how you're going to deal with that in advance is great. And so I think once people come up from from dealing with these issues, then that's going to be something that I'm going to be asked to draft, and that I think is probably a good idea to have in your policy manuals.
Great, thanks so much. Yes, Roy.
Hi, yes. So we all are already working on our emergency response plan, and it will address pandemic issues. And right now, I can foresee like a micro pandemic, like basically on reserve influenza, like a regular flu. You know, I mean, sometimes our offices just everybody seems to be sick and coughing, stuff like that. But as far as policy amendments goes, you know, working from home, I can see this actually affecting things like, you know, stuff that happens on the reserve. I mean, it's not just the reserve, but it's like bed bugs and head lice, you know, issues like that we can apply this policy, these amended policies to those kind of situations to require people to work from home.
Thanks so much, Roy. The next question, actually, if I could point it back to Roy first, just to get your ideas on this, but how to best track employees' time and work from home to make sure they're working all hours, delivering on their work. If we suspect that they are not, should we be issuing layoffs?
That's a live issue. You know, I can't really comment on it without the advice from my administrator, my chief counsel. I'd rather not comment on it because we don't have a policy in place right now. We're working on it. I'm really looking forward to getting a template from Scott as well. You know, I think that honesty is the best policy. Calling in, checking in, reporting. You know, I have a journal that I write everything in that I do. You know, all the stuff that I've done, but that's from my own personal point of view. And, you know, I mean, I have to basically keep two journals going, one for HR and one for the EOC team.
Mm-hmm. Scott, anything you'd like to add to that question?
Yeah, I think Roy's hit on kind of the main issues there. So what you want to do is just turn your mind to, for each individual that you're allowing to work from home, keep in mind you don't have to have a blanket policy that applies to everyone. So that you have one overarching policy, but then for each individual, you're going to want to cater. We're going to allow you to work from home, but here's what our expectations are of you. So for some employees, that's not going to mean, that's just going to mean that they check in at the beginning of the day and check in at the end, and maybe provide you some update, because you're not concerned about that, whether or not they're doing their job. It's pretty obvious that they are. For other employees, it may be that they're recording their time and submitting a timesheet at the end of each day, which shows, you know, basics of what they did. And so you can increase or decrease the amount of reporting requirements based on the individual employee and what their job is. And then if you're running into issues where you don't feel that the person's actually performing properly, then it becomes a performance management issue, just like any other employee, where you're now going to say, okay, well, unfortunately, because it doesn't appear that you're following what we've asked you to do, we're now going to require even more controls put on, you know, what you're doing, and you may lose the right to work from home if you're not doing what we're asking you to do. And so usually that's enough. Hopefully you don't have to get into a discipline procedure where you're looking at a potential layoff or even a termination. It's just like a regular situation. You know, we're obviously shying away from terminations in these unique circumstances if they can be avoided. And so really performance management and just helping them along the way, you know, and I've just as an example of an issue that I had with a client recently, this person was really fighting back against any controls put on them. And when the employer ended up talking to them, it turned out that it was more just the person was really very nervous, very scared and suffering some mental health issues from being isolated and at home and worrying about COVID. And so they ended up just agreeing, look, maybe it's better if you just take a leave of absence, you go and get your CRB benefit. And the employee was actually quite relieved at that point, because it just wasn't working for either person, and it wasn't really it wasn't the employee's fault. It wasn't the employer's fault. It was the situation. And so these leaves of absence can sometimes allow you to another option for the employee if it's not working out very well for those kind of reasons.
Great, thanks so much. This question is for Roy. Is the insurance benefits carrier that Lytton uses providing additional resources for your staff, not just computer applications, but counselors to talk to?
Yes, you know, I mean, we do have an IT person on staff. She is really good at her job. Trying to reach out or provide the technology to everybody is, you know, trying to communicate. I mean, there are actually people who don't have access to the internet or anything like that, you know. So trying to get that information out there in multiple platforms is always a challenge, you know. And then with the physical distancing thing, trying to get that information to people's doorstep presents challenges. Our health office is actively reaching out to our community on a bi-weekly basis, like door to door. And that presents a challenge in itself. I know that, like I said, we need to communicate effectively. And the way I operate is visual. You know, I believe a lot of us operate on visual cues, especially in human resource management. You know, those are the things that I miss. I miss those personal contacts, you know, every day. When we were in the office, I could walk across the foyer to my administrator's office, walk down the hallway to our chief's office. You know, those things aren't available. You know, we need to be able to communicate, and everybody needs to share their concerns. You know, this is a wonderful time for policy development. The challenges that we face is an opportunity to strengthen our policy. I think that everybody, you know, when it comes down to it, we're all employees in one fashion or another, and trying to be accountable, trying to be, you know, accepting of, you know, determining your own day's schedule, a personal thing, trying to balance your work and home life, you know, in your own home. In my home, you know, I mean, trying to, I do work from our guest bedroom because we can't have guests over anymore, you know, and it's so much easier for me to shut my door and then concentrate on my job. Sorry, I'm starting to ramble on. I'm sorry. I do that.
Thanks, Roy. You're doing my job for me as a moderator. You just know when you're rambling. No, move on. No worries. We have just a few minutes left. I actually don't mind going over a little bit because we still have a number of questions, if that's okay with the two of you, maybe another 10 minutes or so. The next question is, an employer took a leave of absence. Is he responsible for paying the full amount for his benefits, his and his employer's portion? Is this common?
For a leave of absence, you shouldn't be. They shouldn't be having to pay the employer's portion of the benefits. The employer should be continuing that portion. My understanding is that there's a requirement that be continued to be done. And so on a layoff, it's different. If they want to continue their benefits, you could potentially say, well, you have to pay for both. But on a leave of absence, it depends. You can look at what your policies are, but they still should have access to it, and the employer should be paying the employer's portion of the benefits.
Great, thank you. The next question is, are there any particular guiding principles for workload reallocation? For instance, if there's work that can be done by an employee, same type of work such as admin, but would not normally be performed by that employee, should that be covered by a temporary work assignment letter?
You could do it more formally like that if you wanted to. There's no obligation to do that. If obviously, if you're in a non-union setting, you can assign work to people that's reasonably within their skill set without any concern. It's only if you were totally fundamentally changing their job in a non-union setting where it would be where the person could say, look, I didn't sign up to be your janitor. You should be laying me off, right? I'm your school principal or something, right? And so that would be something where if the person says, look, I'll just do whatever work's available, then you would just say, okay, here's your work assignment going forward, and just have them agree to that. And so there's really no requirement that you put that in writing or that you have an addendum to it. Now, for in the unionized sector, for those with unions, then you have to be more careful because you have to get the union's agreement if you're going outside the scope of their regular job description. In the non-union setting, if someone comes to you and says, that's not in my job description, that's not a legitimate answer for an employee to give in the non-union setting.
Great, thank you. Oh, yes, Roy. You're muted. There you go.
Oh, yeah, there you go. So, when I think about job descriptions and, in a management position, there's always that, and everything else the administrator tells you to do, like that kind of an idea. That raises a concern to me when we tried to bring in the EOC team job descriptions and duties, tasks that they have to do. There's a conflict there, as one is an emergency situation, but what happens to your regular day job duties? I am a department of one, and I can't lean on anybody else besides my administrator and our personnel committee, but trying to coordinate meetings and stuff like that around all of the other video conferences that we attend. It presents challenges. Like I said, having more than one hat is a normal thing for most employees of the band office, and when I go into the office, I wear gloves, I sanitize everything that I touch and stuff like that, and that's not, but then I've been the relief janitor before, and I don't mind taking on those jobs and helping out our janitors, because our janitors are the ones that face the most health threat, because they're in there every day doing their job, with that risk of, they don't know exactly how many people came in, or what they've touched and stuff like that. And that is mental stress.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Roy, for your comments. The next question is, if an employee is absent due to sickness, in particular COVID-19, are these days deducted from their entitlement? And if they run out of sick leave, what are their options?
So yeah, so there's a difference between paid and unpaid sick leave. Paid sick leave in your policies is a benefit that you offer to employees, and some employers are modifying their paid sick leave programs to allow greater access for COVID related, and that's just going to depend on your budget and where you're at as an employer. But essentially, yes, it would count as using up their paid sick leave if they choose to use that. And once their paid sick leave runs out, then they're on essentially an unpaid sick leave, just like everyone else. And at that point, they should probably be able. Then they will be able to access the benefits, the CERB benefits, if they are sick, and if it's COVID related. And so they then would just be off on an unpaid sick leave, but accessing benefits. And so some employees may choose not to use their paid sick leave and go directly onto CERB benefits if it's actually very close to what their income would be anyways. And that's an option that they have as well.
Great. Thanks so much. The next, oh, yeah, sorry.
There is, I mean, the fiscal year just ended. People should have had their sick leaves rebooted or whatever, you know.
Yeah. Thank you. The next question is, should the employer pay both employer and employee pay pension premiums? Should both the employer and employee pay pension premiums?
Yeah, on a leave of absence, you should be continuing the pension payments going forward. So the employee would be paying their share, and the employer would be paying their share. And you know, the employer could decide to pay both if they wanted to, and they had the budget for it.
Great. The next question is, if an employee does take leave of absence and does apply for CERB, will it be taxable or non-taxable for on-reserve employees?
That's going to be a little bit outside my area of expertise, so I try not to get into tax issues just because they're complicated. I would assume that whether they're taxable normally with their income, then CRB probably wouldn't be taxable, or would be if they normally are taxable, and if they're not normally taxable, then they wouldn't be taxable. But I don't know how the government's going to administer it. They're probably not going to deduct tax off of the benefit, but I don't know.
Thanks so much. Probably good to have CRA on one of these next webinars for sure. All right, the next question is, oh, we already answered that one. If the employer is supposed to make sure it's only essential staff, does the band manager have the right to override decisions made by the team leads that there is enough social distancing between employees?
So this is more of a question that comes down to how your internal process works between your team leads and the band manager. Band manager can usually override decisions of team leads, but you're going to want to be careful in doing that, because if the team leads have made determinations that this is as many as they feel is safe, then you're going to want to be able to justify it. You don't want to risk having employees coming forward and claiming that they're in an unsafe work environment. If they're refusing to work because of an unsafe work environment, it creates a whole process that you have to go through under WorkSafe that can take a lot of time and resources to deal with. You're much better off just going and speaking to them and getting an understanding of why they've done what they've done. If there's a safety related issue, and if it is a safety related issue, then defer to their judgment unless you're certain that they've made the wrong call.
Great, thank you. The next question is, do we have to pay severance pay in lieu of notice when laying off for COVID-19? If not, then how do we avoid this?
So this was the biggest issue that we were talking about when I came to layoffs, is why we're trying to avoid layoffs, because the Canada Labour Code allows temporary layoffs without notice for emergency situations like this. And so under the code, you don't have to pay that severance. But as I indicated, under the common law, there's no such right. There's no such thing as a temporary layoff. A layoff is a termination of the employment contract. So unless the employment contract specifically says that you have the right to do a temporary layoff, then the employee could claim that it's a constructive dismissal and potentially sue for that severance. All of my clients, none of my clients, I should say, are paying severance on the temporary layoff. It's just a risk that's out there. It's a risk for all employers. And if they do get anyone claiming that they should be getting severance, they should talk to their legal counsel. And the response is no, we're not paying that. And there's a bunch of reasons why: frustration, as well as the unique nature of COVID, and the fact that we're guaranteeing their job when they come back once this is over, creates a whole different situation. But it's not an easy answer. So if they do have, for now, we're just advising not to pay it unless you're actually wanting to sever the employment relationship. But if you're not wanting to sever it, don't pay it. And if someone is claiming it, or you get a demand letter from a lawyer, then reach out to your legal counsel.
Thanks so much. We're just going to take one more question. How are you dealing, I guess this is more for Roy, how are you dealing with those band employees who are essential workers? Has Lytton decided to do any kind of top up on their end by paying extra? And it was a two-part question. So the second part was is the CERV taxable? Again, that's more of a question for CRA. But go ahead, Roy, if you want to speak to that first part of the question.
So like I said, when we activated our EOC, the Chief and Counsel has put everything on hold basically until after April 30th. Everybody's being paid. Everybody's still making contributions to their benefits and pension plans. It will be reassessed after or on or before April 30th. And that's as much information as I know about it. We're still on the payroll. People that are on the EOC teams are doing extra work, and we are doing timesheets on the activities that we're doing with the EOC. So hasn't, it's business as usual, but working from home, social distancing, limited entry into the office. We have a schedule that can be no more than 5 people in our building at one time. I try to get in there, and I have to wait till the next day because the schedule is.
Great, thanks so much. We're going to actually launch a live poll. We'd really, really like your feedback. We've had a lot of positive feedback just from this webinar that this was a really great session. So I'm going to launch a live poll right now. It's just a few questions. It should pop up on your screen. I'm only going to leave it up for a few minutes while I do some closing comments, but please fill out that live poll so that we can better plan for future webinars. We do plan on doing these on a weekly basis. Of course, the way that we're going to plan is based on your feedback on what topics you'd like to hear. So this one has been very successful. So thank you both, Scott and Roy, for both being with us today. Like I mentioned before, this webinar is being recorded, and we just created a brand new Facebook page. The First Nations Public Service Secretariat has, a YouTube channel where all these webinars are going to be hosted. So we'll share that as well. If you registered for our webinar, you've been signed up for our newsletter to make sure that you're up to date on all future webinars. Lots of new information on our website too as well, which is also brand new and looks pretty beautiful. So please be sure to check all that stuff out. Thank you so much for filling out the poll. I see that we have about 30 people that have gone ahead and submitted their answers to that. The one other thing I want to mention is our Facebook group. It's called the First Nation Administrators Network. Please join that group. All the members on that page are people who work in First Nation administration. So your band manager, your HR manager, and it's really another platform for information sharing. If you have a question about a policy or about something else, just maybe another nation has done that project or has that type of policy or can share that type of information with each other. That has been the biggest ask from most First Nations since the First Nations Public Service has been reiterated in the past couple of years, is why are we not talking to each other? So that's another great place for everybody to share information. I already mentioned our YouTube channel, and I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll if we don't have anybody else answering those questions. And again, I just want to give a big thanks to Scott McCann and Roy Spinks for joining us today and providing their expertise and their experience and on just how to deal with these HR related issues right now in this very uncertain time. We will be back again next week with another webinar on Wednesday. So again, keep your eye out for a newsletter, email, a Facebook post. You can follow us on social media, like us, love us, retweet us, follow us. All right, that's it for now. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Stay healthy and safe out there. Bye-bye.